Yeah, that's right.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Today we will present about company Kumpulan Perangsang Selangor Berhad. I, Ahmad Akif Haikam bin Zainuddin.
My name is Saiful Ashraf bin Saiful Bahrim.
My name is Ahmad Izani bin Hasnan.
My name is Abdullah Hakim bin Ahmad Salihuddin.
So I will tell a little bit about the company background. So Kumpulan Perangsang Selangor Berhad incorporated on 11 August 1975. Kumpulan Perangsang Selangor Berhad is an investment holding company listed on the main market of Bursa Malaysia Securities Berhad. The nature of the business is under the industrial products and service sector. Kumpulan Perangsang Selangor Berhad has core investment in the manufacturing sector as well as business in trading, licensing and infrastructure sectors. In 2000, the company acquired 30% equity stake in Splash Holdings, 30% equity stake in Abbas Sedan Berhad, and 20% equity stake in Spring Holdings. The company market capitalization hit the RM 1 billion mark, reaching the RM 1.35 billion at the end of December 2007. Furthermore, on 2016, the company acquired 51% stake in Smart Pipe Technology Sedan Berhad, an engineering company. After that, in 2019, Kumpulan Perangsang Selangor Berhad subsidiary Smart Pipe Forms signed a joint venture agreement with Menteri Besar Kedah Incorporated to provide non-revenue water solution in Kedah. So that's all for company background.
Okay, for liquidity ratio, firstly is current ratio. The current ratio is a liquidity ratio that measures the ability of a business to pay short-term or due obligation within 1 year. In order to satisfy the existing debt and other payables, it show customer and analysis how a firm can optimize the existing asset on the balance sheet. So for the formula, current ratio equal to current asset divided by current liability. The amount that we got from the company is 1.86. For the ratio of 1.86 times for each 1 ringgit of current liabilities, the firm has just RM 1.86 of current asset to support the debt. The current ratio of the company is lower than the industry average, which is RM 1.97. The output of the firm is not good because their current asset will not overweight the current liabilities. A current ratio lower than average in the industry may suggest a large burden of distress or default. In order to offset the existing obligation, the company bears the company must accelerate the conversion period of debtor and account receivable. Okay, for acid test ratio, the acid test ratio use a firm balance sheet data as an indicator of whether it has sufficient short-term asset to cover its short-term liabilities. The metric is more useful in certain situations than the current ratio, also known as the working capital ratio, since it ignores assets such as inventory, which may be difficult to quickly liquidate. So formula for asset test ratio is current asset minus inventory minus prepaid expenses divided by current liabilities. From the company, we got 1.53 ringgit of current asset for 1.86 ratio as a backup for every 1 ringgit of current liabilities. The present ratio of the company is higher than the industry average of RM 1.59, 1.49 ringgit, making it possible for the company to pay its obligation. This means that the company has sufficient asset to cover current liabilities without selling inventory. We can conclude that the company is performing well from the current ratio compared to the industry average. Inventory is deducted because it generally takes longer time to be converted into cash. Prepaid expenses also deduct because they are expenses that the firm has paid in advance and cannot be used to pay obligation when they come due. In other words, the business does not have an issue with holding unnecessary goods and has a high capacity to turn existing asset into cash. As it is asset test ratio is higher than industry average and does not depend too heavily on inventory. The firm is therefore able to pay its obligation immediately. That's all from me. Thank you.
Next is leverage ratio. Leverage ratio are used to determine the relative level of debt load that a business has incurred. This ratio compares the total debt obligation to either the assets or equity of the business. The first of the leverage ratio is debt ratio. With reference of the above figure, the group debt ratio is 50.08%, which is higher than the 38% industry average. The debt ratio of the company means that they require 50.08% of its loan to finance the asset, while the rest have been financed by the shareholders' equity. The consequence of this poor performance will make the company difficult in applying for loan that could help them minimize the possible loss in case of liquidation. The possible cause for the company having a high debt ratio is because the company rely too much on using its debt to fund the company. In order to improve the debt ratio, the company can reduce its operating costs in order to maximize the company's revenue so that it can settle its debt obligation. Besides, the company also needs to immediately strengthen its debt collection from its customer so that the company have a good financial position. Next is debt to equity ratio. Compared to the industry average ratio, which is 92.7%, the 107.78% ratio shown by the company is higher. This indicates that the company used more borrowings instead of equity compared to the competitors in the industry. The company can issue more new shares to shareholders and increase its sales revenue to obtain more profits in order to improve the bad performance of the financing source. By doing that, the company can have optimal performance of the source of the financing. The example of the improvement is lowering the cost, increasing the revenue, and many more. Last but not least, the ratio is time interest earned. Kumpulan Perangsang Selangor Berhad has lower time interest earned compared to the industry average. This indicates that the company is not willing to pay its interest costs on the basis of its operating profits. The possible costs are the value of company's EBIT did not enough to cover the interest expense for the year. The possibility of the company for bankruptcy is high, so the company is at a very high risk. The way to improve the times interest earned is to pay down debt. Reducing the amount of debt on the balance sheet of the company would help to decrease interest payment from the company. In fact, giving more equity to investors in the form of stock would be one way of paying down their debt. Okay, that's all for me.
Okay, next, I will explain about the profitability ratio. Profitability ratio show how efficiently a company generate profit and value for shareholders. Profitability ratio are divided into 5 parts, which is gross profit margin, operating profit margin, net profit margin, return on assets, and return on equity. I will explain about gross profit margin and operating profit margin. For the gross profit margin, the formula is gross profit over sale time with 100. For kumpulan Perangsang Berhad, the ratio is 24.15%, which is lower than the industry average to 28%. It means that the company make RM 0.2415 of gross profit for every RM1 sale made. It is poor company performance as it has low profit compared to industry average. So the possible causes of low gross profit margin are due to insufficient sale volume, due to high selling price, or higher cost of goods sold. The higher cost of goods sold may be due to expensive sources in supply of goods, higher labor costs, and high production wastage. For a corporation to survive, the gross profit should be at least equal to all the operating expenses, so there will be no net loss. In order to improve the gross profit margin, the company need to review its pricing policy by reduce the price. Next, the company need to reduce cost of goods sold by change the supplier that offer the cheapest price and larger trade discount. The company also have to reduce the labor cost and production wastage so that the profit will increase. So the business will boost its gross profit margin by increasing its price, reducing the direct cost of goods and inventory waste, and readjusting the sales. Next is operating profit margin. The formula is earning before interest and tax divided with sale and multiply with 100. For this company, the ratio is 6.53%. For the industry average, negative 4.9%. So this means that the company making RM 0.0653 of operating profit for every RM1 of sales. The company performance is good as the operating profit margin is higher than industry average. So the possible cause of high operating profit margin are due to low operating expenses and also higher selling price. A higher operating profit margin is more beneficial since it is making enough revenue from its operation. The company need to maintain or increase this operating profit margin because the higher the operating profit margin, the higher the profitability of the company. In order to increase the operating profit margin, company can review their selling price and also reduce the cost of goods sold. By achieve economies of scale in company activities, the business will also maximize its operating profit margin. Through auditing company's activity with an eye to finding place where they use more raw material than required and manufacturing process that make more time than necessary, the company can also cut waste from business operations. So Saiful Ashraf will explain the net profit margin, net profit margin, return on asset, and return on equity.
Okay, so next is net profit margin. Net profit margin is the ratio of net profit to revenue of a company or business segment. Net profit margin is usually expressed as a percentage, but can also be represented in decimal form. As we can see from the table above, the group ratio for Kumpulan Perangsang Selangor Berhad is 3.10%, which means the net profit margin of the company is higher than the average industry, which is negative 12 and 0.4%. For each ringgit it received, the net profit of 3.10% shows the company earns 3 cents in profit. A high net profit margin means that a business can manage its costs efficiently and supply goods or services at a price that is substantially higher than its cost. By increasing sales, such as by selling more product or services, business may raise their net margin. So next, return on asset. The formula for return on asset is net income available to common stockholder per total asset times by 100. The return on asset is a probability ratio, also referred as the return on total asset, by comparing the net income of the total asset to the average total asset. As we can see in the table, the percentage for Kumpulan Perangsang Selangor Berhad is 1.17%, which is the company have lower return of asset as compared to industry average, that 4.7%. The return on asset, in other words, every ringgit invested in asset during the year produce 0.01 ringgit of net revenue. The explanation of higher asset return may be due to lower utilization of asset and wastage. This is lower than the asset return average of 1.74% in the industry average. Striving for revenue growth also entails significant upfront investment in inventory, including receivable from account, inventories, equipment for manufacturing and facilities. A drop in demand will leave a company high, dry, and over-invested in capital that it cannot sell to pay its bills. So for the recommendation, we suggest that the company need to reduce asset cost. And last for this is return on equity. The formula for return on equity is net income available to common stockholder divided by common equity times by 100. The return on equity is a probability ratio that calculates the capacity of a company to produce income from its shareholder investment in the company. In other words, the return on equity ratio shows how much profit from each ringgit of common shareholder equity is generated. So, as we can see in the table, the group ratio gained 2.81%, which means the return on equity for industry average is higher than the return on equity for the company. The industry average ratio is 3.1%. So, for the 2.1 percentage for group ratio. This implies that this year, every ringgit of common shareholders' equity gained around 0.028 ringgit. This is lower than the 6.12% industry average. A lower return on equity means that the team of a company is unsuccessful when it comes to using investment financing to expand their business is more likely to provide investor with bad returns. So for the recommendation, the business will raise their profit margin. So we move to the common size ratio.
Okay, for the common size ratio, we have two, which is no common size ratio for non-current asset and for the non-current liability. Okay, for the non-current asset, first one is property, plant and equipment. Property, plant and equipment size ratio is rising from 8.39% on 2018 to 16.24% in 2019. This is because over the year, the organization acquired additional and new assets. Change in land, plant and equipment due to the sale of the asset, and therefore the amount of depreciation are different as the useful life of the property, plant and equipment. Therefore, in order to maintain the property, plant and equipment, the organization has to include maintenance costs so that the property, plant and equipment are not broken down. The company also can buy new plant, property and equipment to increase the production of the company so that they can make more profit. Next is right of use of assets. The common size ratio for right of use property asset is increased from 0% on 2018 to 3.83% on 2019. It is because the lease obligation will be raised by 2019. The right to use property has been depreciated every year, and the interest on the lease debt would have accrued. As a result, the carrying value of the lease debt rise due to accrued interest. Next is investment property. The typical size ratio for investment property decreased from 4.26% on 2018 to 3.9% in 2019. This is because some of the assets have shifted from investment property to property, plant and equipment. This eliminates investment property from 2018 to 2019. So, in order to raise investment properties, the organization need to have more land keep for long-term capital appreciation. Next is investment in associate. This typical size ratio for investment in associate is decreasing sharply from 42.85% on 2018 to 14.08% on 2019. The popular size ratio is reduced because the investment in another business is reduced by the company. The business will increase the investment in associate by spending more in other firm, since this investment show an accurate income balance and also show the percentage of earnings from the investment.
So next, intangible asset. As we can see in the table, the common size ratio for this company is slightly increased from 10.93% to 10.96%. This is because the company acquired new intangible resources into the business. Then goodwill. The goodwill shows an expanding of the goodwill shows an expanding of 8.97% to 8.18% from 2018 to 2019. The company acquires another fixed asset from another company. Next, long-term receivable. From 2018 to 2019, the common size ratio for this company shows an increasing of 1.18% to 4.32%. This is because the amount due from another related parties are secured. Second last, deferred tax asset. The common size ratio for this company is increasing from 0.02% to 0.04%. Company experience a continued loss from operation or from balance sheet adjustment. Lastly, club membership. The club membership is decreasing from 0.09% to 0.06%. The company need to offer more value of their club membership. So we move to the next part from Ahmad Izani.
Okay, for non-current liability, we have 5 things, which is firstly is other payable. For the other payable, the ratio for the other payable has increased from 2.37% to 3.52%. The possibilities that the changes have occurred is payment due to the investment suppliers as well as other payments that the company due, such as pay to staff who have been compensated but are paid only in the future. In order to prevent the increase in the ratio, the company have to pay the supplier on time so that they are less payable. Number 2 is loans and borrowings. The common size ratio for the loans and borrowings have changed from 18.69% to 22.03% in a year. The change for this to happen is the company depend on debt rather than the shareholders' equity. The company have to increase the equity such as common stock. Number 3 is lease liabilities. The ratio show that the company lease liabilities increased from 0% to 0.89%. This indicates that the company have a new due payment on the lease, such as building. The company have to pay the lease item on time in order to reduce the ratio. Next, Abdullah Hakim will present.
So next we move to Abdullah Hakim.
Okay, for Deferred tax liability, there is slightly increase in the ratio for deferred tax liability from 3.80% to 4.65%. This is because the tax is due for the current period but has not yet been paid. The company has to be punctual in paying the tax liabilities in order to decrease the ratio. Next is post-employment benefits, which is the ratio for it has increased from 0 to 0.46% in 2019. The example is medical care, life insurance, pensions, and many more. As for the conclusion, financial ratio analysis is very important to reveal the important relation and base of comparison in uncovering conditions and trends which are difficult to detect by inspecting the individual components that make up ratio. We use ratio because it can properly interpret and identify areas that are require further investigation. To sum up, Kumpulan Perangsang Selangor Berhad overall financial ratio analysis shows an impressive and better result from the industry average. Their company performance is in good condition. For a company to determine their overall financial ratio analysis, they need to check whether their business is profitable, can the business pay the bills on time, how does the business finance, how does the company's performance as compared to their competitors, and how does the business compare to the industry norms. Last but not least, financial analysis means the health and stability of the company. It may be useful to compare a company's certain industry average to get feel for how the company is performing. In order to increase the performance of the business and pave the best way to where the business is headed to, analysis of financial ratio is needed to be calculated by the company. Okay, that's all from our group. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your time to hear our present.